The reason I've been hiding in this closet today is because I heard a rumor that there were some monsters around. And the funny thing is, I just realized that I like monsters. I especially like Universal Studio monsters. So that's what I want to talk about with you today. Welcome to the Kazdoy Closet. I'm Kazdoy. That's my closet. It's full of all the stuff that I love. So let's get into it. Now, a lot of people grew up watching westerns and watching gangster films, and I had my share of those, but for some reason it was the monster films that always kind of did it for me, and especially the Universal Studio monsters. Now, Universal got started in the monster film genre back in the silent era in the 20s, where they started with films like Hunchback of Notre Dame and Phantom of the Opera, both starring the great Lon Chaney, who of course did his own makeup, and sometimes it was rather painful to do that, but he insisted on doing it. And years later, in 1957, they made a biopic of him called A Man of a Thousand Faces. Now, in the biopic, they show his parents as being both deaf and mute. So that's how Lon Chaney developed his skills of pantomime, because he had to learn how to communicate with his parents. I've heard that they take a lot of liberties with Lon Chaney's story in this film, but I watched it as a kid and I loved it. I watched it recently, still thought it was really good. Jimmy Cagney plays Lon Chaney. The funny thing is, the makeup they use for the Phantom and for the Hunchback in this film is worse, much worse than the makeup that Lon Chaney developed for himself back in the 1920s for his own films. So what I want to do is show you the Universal box sets. These are for the monsters, the classic monster sets. This is the Blu-ray. This is the Classic Monsters Blu-ray, and all the monster films are in here. And then there's also an old one, which is the DVDs, and that is the DVDs of the Classic Monster Collection. Why do I have both, you're probably wondering. Well, aside from being totally neurotic about it, I want the Blu-rays, of course, because they look so good and they're so complete. They have everything on it, all the different spin-offs, which I'll get to later. But what I don't like about the Blu-rays is the look of them. They're very standardized and very kind of monochromatic. So a minor quibble, but that's why I also have the DVDs. I haven't gotten rid of them because they're using the great artwork from the posters. So look at the bold colors and the great logos they have. So I can't quite seem to part with the DVD set. Now, the first big hit they had, Universal, was Dracula. And it was, of course, a talkie. And Dracula was based on the novel by Bram Stoker. And then later on, there was a stage play, and really the film is based more on the play. And if you see the film, you'll notice it is a little bit stagey, but still good. You know, one reason why I think these Universal films resonated so much with me as a kid was because the look of them was very expressionistic, coming over from the German and the other European influences, with a very dreamlike quality and the strange angles and shadows that emotional. And not only that, but the practical effects give it a more tangible, more real look than the computer effects of today. So it felt like you could touch them. In addition, you have characters like Frankenstein and the Wolfman who are outsiders. They don't quite fit in. And I think a lot of adolescents go through that. I'm still going through that, but that's another story for another video that nobody wants to see. Anyways, Bela Lugosi played Dracula, did a great job. Other people played him later on, like John Carradine and Lon Chaney Jr. We'll talk about him a little bit later. They followed this one up with Frankenstein, and that was in the same year, 1931, with the great Boris Karloff. Now, Boris Karloff was an actor who was kind of knocking around Hollywood for about 20 years. He couldn't seem to really catch fire anywhere. And Lon Chaney ran into him once and said, he had some advice for Boris Karloff, and he said, what you need to do is be willing to do something that nobody else will do. And that'll make you stand out in Hollywood. And it looks like he probably did that. Now, actually, Bela Lugosi was going to play the Frankenstein monster, but he didn't want to put up with all the makeup. So Karloff got it, and he was 44 years old when he played the monster, so he wasn't a young man. And he became one of those overnight successes you hear so much about. And the great makeup was done by Jack Pierce. Jack Pierce is somebody who is still influential for the modern horror makeup artists. And he, one of his first films was a silent film called The Man Who Laughs. This is from the 20s. And if you look at the picture, you can see how this influenced what the Joker looks like in the later Batman comics and then in the films. So Karloff later on, he went on to have several marriages, about 6 or so, 5 divorces. So hey, that 6th marriage, that was the charm. And he later on in the 60s, he did a series called Thriller. He was sort of the host of the anthology series. Each episode was an hour. It went from 60 to 62. And it was like a mystery and a suspense series, not really a horror series. And it's okay, it has its ups and downs. And then at the end of his career, he did a film that I really like called Targets, where this was in 1968, and then he died a year later. And I want to talk about this film in more detail in another video, because this was a film by a director, first-time director, whose name was, I don't want to tell you now, I'll keep you in suspense. We'll do it for another video. But a really good film, we'll talk about some other time. Universal followed up with The Mummy. The Mummy, you know, I've only seen this, I think, maybe once, and I'd like to see it again. And again, this is with Karloff. But then a film that I've seen many, many times, because I used to use it in my film class in high school, is Bride of Frankenstein. This is where the monster speaks, even though Karloff said he doesn't think that's a good idea, but I guess he lost that argument. And this like the original Frankenstein, this is based on Mary Shelley's novel. And in Bride of Frankenstein, Elsa Lanchester is playing Mary Shelley, and she has a contest with her friends, her other writer friends, who can write the scariest story. And this is the one she came up with. And this has got a lot of humor in it. It's one of those rare examples where people consider a sequel better than the original. So Bride of Frankenstein, another really big hit, and Karloff got, I think, top billing on this one, whereas in Frankenstein, nobody really knew who he was. They followed that one up with The Invisible Man, another solid film. Now this one, Bride of Frankenstein and The Old Dark House were all directed by James Whale, excellent director, and there's a film about him also called Gods and Monsters you might want to check out. Anyways, Invisible Man, the interesting thing about this is the main character, the quote monster, is not as sympathetic as the other monsters were in the Universal canon. And recently they did a new version of The Invisible Man with Elizabeth Moss. They did a really good job on that, so if you haven't seen that yet, I would check that out. That was followed up with The Wolfman. Here's Lon Chaney Jr. coming in to play the Wolfman. And this one is very important to me because when my son was small, at night we do the usual routine where my wife would go tuck him in bed, so he's lying in bed and with the blanket on him, and then I would go in and it was my turn to tuck him in, and he always wanted to hear the story. What was the story? I'd say, well, Did I ever tell you that a few years ago I was camping and something bit me? I think it might have been a werewolf. I'm not sure. But I do know that every time there's a full moon, and I think there is a full moon tonight. Did you notice that? I believe there is. I started getting these weird feelings like my muscles are changing, or my body's changing, and there's hair growing all over my arms and my hands and my legs, and I don't know, and I start kind of feeling really bad, and then and of course that would cause my son to scream and then laugh, and isn't that what horror films are all about? So he always wanted to hear that story. So that's why The Wolf Man is a special film for me. After these films, Universal did a bunch of what they call monster rallies, or you might call them monster mashes, where all the monsters were visiting each other. So you have Son of Frankenstein, and you have Frankenstein's daughter, and you have Son of Dracula and Dracula's daughter. And yes, I have all these, and I held onto these two because of the artwork. And all those films are also in the Blu-ray set, so I have a lot of repeats because I'm crazy, that's why. Then they kind of died off for a while, the Universal Studio monster films died off until 1948, and then Abbott and Costello made a film called Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Now, Abbott and Costello's career was kind of like taking a nosedive at that point, so they came up with this idea for them. And the funny thing is, Costello said, I don't think that's a very funny idea to have monsters with us, but what's ironic is it revitalized their career. And one key element of the film is they took the monsters seriously. They didn't treat them as jokes. So it was a good mix of horror and comedy, which not many people were doing back then. Then they made, Abbott and Costello ended up making a whole series of films. Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man. Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. Abbott and Costello Meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Here's the great thing that happened when I went to the Valley Relics Museum here in the San Fernando Valley. And what happened is they have an original script of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, signed by Lou Costello, Bud Abbott, Glenn Strange, who played the monster, Frankenstein monster, Bela Lugosi, who played Dracula, and Lon Chaney Jr., who played the Wolfman. And there they have it in a showcase, and it's like, wow. I couldn't stop staring at that sucker. I would sure love to have that. The last film, and the last film that Universal made of the great monster films, is The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Another very good film. A lot of breakthrough underwater photography in this. I just watched this again recently. It's pretty impressive for 1954, I think. And directed by Jack Arnold, who went on to direct some classic sci-fi films such as This Island Earth, Tarantula, The Incredible Shrinking Man, It Came from Outer Space. I really want to recommend a book called The Lady from the Black Lagoon. I believe it's written by Mallory O'Mara. She's a local LA writer, and it's all about Millicent Patrick. She was one of the makeup artists who developed the creature outfit, which is amazing. It's just an amazing outfit, costume. And the trouble she had in that era trying to get noticed and get recognized for it. And it's also a story, the book, The Lady from the Black Lagoon, about the author who wrote this book and her trials and tribulations in Hollywood. So I really recommend that book, The Lady from the Black Lagoon. That's the Universal Studio pictures that I love, the monster pictures. They're very influential. You could see them in cereals, you could see them in toys, models, you could see them in costumes. They had that show, The Munsters, that was sort of a riff on them. There's all kinds of books. Here's a pretty good one, Universal Studio Monsters. This is out of print, so it's going for about $100 and more. I got this for about $40 several years ago. There's your buddy on the back. And I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode. So for all the reasons I mentioned in this video, you know, these monster films will always hold a special place in my closet and in my heart. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment if you'd like to. What's your own experience with them, or something you want to add, something I forgot about. And leave a thumbs up if you'd like to. Subscribe would be great. Meanwhile, I think I hear the howl of the wolf. That means I'm getting out of here. I like monsters, but I don't want to get near them, okay? So I'm going to get back into this closet where they can't find me. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you next time.